Joining us now on the Picks for Polls podcast, continuing our summer scouting series, we've got the Clemson Insider's very own Will Vandervort in the house. He's a big Pittsburgh sports fan, for those of you guys that are wondering, but he's going to be here breaking down Clemson for us as we continue our summer scouting series. Will, how's it going today? Thanks so much for hopping on.
Man, it's going great. Just surviving in another 90-plus day here in the South, so it's always fun. You can go outside and just melt.
Yeah, it's we got 90 plus here a couple weeks ago, but yesterday we had super nice and sunny, and then because Andrew and I are both in Illinois, and then we had thunderstorms in the afternoon and evening, and then it ended up being like sunny again until 8:30, 9 o'clock. So let's get right into it, because Clemson is this incredibly interesting program. We were talking before we started recording, and you had mentioned that the hope is that they get back to kind of the level that they were playing at. You look at the calendar now, you're sitting here in 2024, and the days of Deshaun Watson and Trevor Lawrence, national championships are well in the rearview mirror. But what's the vibe around the program? What are the expectations for Clemson going into another season under Dabo Swinney?
Well, the expectation at Clemson now is always to be in that mix for the college football playoff and to be playing for a national championship. And so that's where they're at right now. I mean, the last couple of years they haven't had the level of success they had when they went to 6 straight college football playoffs from 2015 to 2020 for a number of reasons. COVID played a big role in that. It hurt them in recruiting, where they lost probably some blue chip players that they probably would have gotten had they been able to come to Clemson, because that's something Dabo Swinney and even coaches before him have always harped about. Like, when Clemson's recruit, it's not an easy place to recruit to. So you got to get mama and daddy to Clemson. You got to get them here so they can see it and understand it, because generally that's what wins the recruits and the parents over, is when they finally come to Clemson and see that it is a small town, and it's like basically a high school town with a huge college football stadium in it. It really is. It's not a big place, and so it's always a unique thing. And so COVID really hurt Clemson there for those 2 years where recruits weren't able to come on campus. I think because of that, Clemson also missed out, because Dabo does his recruiting, his camp, where he brings in his top prospects every year. And unlike other camps where they do like combine drills and stuff like that, Dabo actually has a true football camp where he gets them out there. They're doing 7-on-7. They're doing skills and drills and things of that nature, where he's taking offensive linemen and defensive tackles and defensive ends, and they're running drills that they would run in practice. And that allows them to get a good evaluation of those players and who they are. And that's why they were able to, have that great run that they had for so long. But when COVID hit, they were unable to bring those kids on campus, and so they couldn't get a true evaluation of the player. And they missed on some guys, and especially at wide receiver. And it really hurt them and set them back offensively for a few years. And that's why I think you saw Clemson struggle. Well, now, though, this year coming into it, they feel real good about, even though I know some of the fans aren't as happy with Cade Klubnik as they want to be, but they feel real good about Cade's progression and where he can be this year. They like their offensive line and where they're going, and how they've gotten better. They hired Matt Luke to be their offensive line coach. But the main thing was they went out and got 2 stud wide receivers in TJ Moore. Excuse my dog popping in over here. 2 stud wide receivers in TJ Moore and Bryant Westco. These are guys that are 4 or 5-star guys that they think are going to be immediate impact players as freshmen and are going to really help the wide receivers and get Clemson back to that high skill level that they're known for when they were, playing for national championships every year. The defense is loaded, as it has been always at Clemson. That's going to be the case again this year. They bring back a ton of talent on the defensive side. A lot of guys that played last season on a team that finished number 8 in the country in total defense. So they feel real good over there on the defensive side, and they feel like now they got the weapons on offense to where they can complement that defense and really kind of jumpstart this program again. So we'll see. I know Dabo Swinney and company feel good about it, but, we got to see it when we see them on the field, right? That's how it works. To me, I never trust a freshman until I actually see him play. And I've only seen a few true freshmen come in and make an impact, and those guys were Sammy Watkins, as you know, and a guy named Deshaun Watson. as you know. Those are the only true freshmen that I've ever seen come in and make an immediate impact.
Well, you mentioned that defense. It's been a calling card for Clemson really over the past few years, and even going back to their days when they were in the national championship conversation. It seems like every year they're sending multiple guys to the NFL that are drafted highly and eventually make pretty significant impacts in the NFL. So, kind of getting to the 2025 draft conversation. Looking at the Clemson defense, who are some of the top names that could be leaving school at the end of this year and entering the 2025 draft?
Well, I think the guy that probably surprised everybody that he came back this year is inside linebacker Barrett Carter, who can also play outside backer as well. He's going to play the Sam and is going to play the weak side this season for Clemson. He's a guy I think next year, if he has the year and why he came back to Clemson, if he has the year that they think he's going to have, he's going to be probably a first-round draft pick, maybe second round at worst case. They really like his athleticism. The guy, he can cover wide, he can cover tight ends, he can cover running backs out of the backfield. He's instinctful, and he can go sideline to sideline. He's got that kind of speed that he can, make plays no matter where he's at on the field, and so he covers a lot of space. NFL teams like that about him. What they wanted to see him do is get a little bit stronger. He had a lot of missed tackles last year, concerned some teams, and that's why I think he ultimately came back. So he's the first guy I think that's going to be, somebody they're going to look at on that defensive side. Another guy who will be eligible for the draft is a guy you might not know of. Excuse my dog again, popping up. DeMonte Capehart. He's a talented defensive tackle. Think of Chester McLaughlin, if that name rings a bell to you guys. Chester McLaughlin played for the Raiders back in the day, was a big 6'4", about 300-pound tackle. DeMonte is about 6'6", 6'5" range, weighs about 330 pounds, got great quickness off the ball. He's a guy that could really, I think, elevate himself to that level if he has the kind of year I think he's going to have this year at that defensive tackle position. And then they got a couple guys that are sophomores that they're just not ready yet on the defense, as far as going pro. They got a few years to go, but they got a guy, Peter Woods, I think is going to be a prospect here in the next couple of years. And then a guy by the name of TJ Parker at defensive end is going to be a guy that you guys are going to recognize as well. Over at linebacker, remember this name, Wade Woodaz. He's a junior. He's a true junior. He's got blazing speed. He can cover space. He can play that hybrid kind of safety linebacker position that you're starting to see a lot of NFL teams start to go to now, except he's a big guy. He's like 6'3", and about 230 pounds, but he's got great range of motion. So he can cover anybody out of the backfield. Clemson likes to play him in their dime packages where he'll basically play safety when they go to that dime look. And so he's a guy that I think you'll see maybe a lot of people who don't know yet will know by the end of this year. I think he's a dynamic player and is a guy that if he has the kind of year I think he's going to have, he's going to be a first-round pick because he's so dynamic. A guy at quarterback that I think could be a top pick in the NFL, could be in the first couple of rounds or so, a guy by the name of Jaden Lucas. The key for him is to stay healthy. He's, again, a 6'2", about 200-pound corner. So he's that big, tall corner, but he also has, again, just like Nate Wiggins did for Clemson last year, great speed where he can run down the field and stay with guys. Last year, he was great in shutting down Florida State. If you watch that Florida State game, you watch what him and Nate Wiggins did shutting down Florida State's receivers, and he can run with anybody. And only when he got hurt late in the game was Florida State able to make a play in overtime to win it. Until then, they just really Clemson had them locked down with those two guys. And so those are the guys I would say would probably be that could come out this year that will be eligible for the draft. Those would probably be the top prospects for Clemson.
That was awesome. Let me just say that. I mean, and again, one of the reasons we love having kind of, college reporters and guys like yourself on is because you're able to provide a lot of really good information, Switching over to the offensive side of the ball here, how about Blake Miller? Because I was looking at the Clemson Insider this morning, and I know that, you guys had published an article about PFF labeling him as one of the top kind of offensive tackles to watch going into next year. I mean, you're talking again about a guy that has started at right tackle each of the last 2 seasons, and there really seems to kind of be this attention around him in terms of, hey, if he has a really good season, he's probably going to be a top 15, top 10, even top 15 pick.
Yeah, I think Blake is a guy that's interesting because first of all, he's really nasty. And so if you played football and you played guys that are offensive linemen, you understand what I mean by nasty. He brings a big attitude to the position. He doesn't care if he's going to hurt your feelings. He's out there to play ball, and he loves contact. He wants to hit. He's going to probably play dirty at times, and that's okay. That's why they play that position. And he's one of those guys. And as far as playing the position at tackle, he came in right away as a true freshman and did well. He did have his moments where he was a true freshman, where he got beat or he just didn't have the right technique or things of that nature. But then, you saw he kind of took a jump last year. Wasn't getting beat as much, wasn't holding. He was known. I think he got called for like 4 or 5 holding penalties as a true freshman, because it just seemed like if he knew he wasn't in the right technique, he just grab. And that's okay because you'd rather him grab than kill the quarterback. And so last year you saw he wasn't giving up the sacks. He wasn't being called for holds. His technique improved greatly. And now that he's got Matt Luke, who, if you guys don't know, this guy is an outstanding, offensive line coach. He coached at Ole Miss for a long time. You can go through the list of guys during his time at Ole Miss that went pro in the NFL, and some guys are still in the league now. Went over to Georgia, did the same thing there. And now Clemson, Dabo Swinney got him to come over here and help his offensive line to get better. And I think, Miller's going to be one of the guys that he really kind of is putting in his back pocket to say, I'm going to make this guy an NFL draft pick, a big-time NFL draft pick. So we'll see if that does translate. But right now, he is really I think Blake's in a situation where because he's going to get an upgrade at coaching, because he has a natural instincts and natural abilities, because he's in his 3rd year, I think you're going to see him take that jump. Clemson was hoping that maybe he would move over to left tackle eventually, but they just like him so good on that right side that he's a spot. I don't have to worry about it, that they're just going to keep him there because they know he can lock down that side. But he can play the left. They do a lot of cross-training at Clemson. He can play the left if he needs to. So we'll see if he can carry that over this year. If I had to say if there's a negative for him, it's probably his range. I think he's probably going to grade better as maybe a guard in the NFL. So he just doesn't have the range that you want your tackle to have, and that's probably why he's not going to play left tackle, to be honest with you. But I can see him playing maybe that right tackle, playing on the right side in the NFL, definitely playing inside at a guard position, either left guard or right guard, definitely.
Yeah, the offensive line is kind of in a position for Clemson where haven't been too many notable names that have gone high in the draft for Clemson in recent years. Like Jackson Carman's probably the biggest name that I can think of just off the top of my head. 2nd round pick to the Bengals a few years ago. But another guy, speaking of tackle position, left tackle, looking at Tristan Lee, former 5-star recruit. How has his development gone? Last year was really the first year he got a ton of playing time. So do you think this is the year where he takes another step forward, or is there more time for development needed there for him?
Yeah, I think there's more time for development for Tristan. He's a guy that came in just, tons of ability, but just no physical ability. So, what I mean by that is he came in, he's the true definition of an offensive lineman. He came in as a fatty. He had to build some bulk. They wanted to get him, but to lose a little bit of weight and then to trim up, and so he could be quicker. He's got the ability to be a good offensive lineman. I think he's probably going to, again, move inside at the next level, where you'll probably see him play a guard position more so, or center position, because he played center and guard in high school. So I think that's where his natural fit is, but he is very athletic. And so they moved him outside because of that athletic ability. He did a pretty good job, I thought, last year playing in that role, especially after Marcus Tate got injured on the left side and was out for the season with the torn ACL. So, I think he's progressed well last year. I think he's still got another year or two left in him just because he was so far behind when he got to Clemson. He just didn't have the strength program in high school that you saw with Blake Miller. Blake Miller had that. So when he came in, physically, Blake Miller's where he needed to be, where Tristan was not. And so that's why Tristan is a little bit behind Blake in his progression.
Yeah, I mean, both of those guys are going to be Tristan as well as Blake. I mean, it's going to be real fun to watch their development as the 2024 season progresses, But looking at the running back room here, Phil Maffa is a player that had an outstanding Gator Bowl. I believe he had 2 touchdowns against Kentucky, if I remember that so he had 4. Yeah, 4
Set
against
a Clemson record,
Kentucky. Yeah. So is this his running back room now in terms of, do you think the expectation for him is that he's going to be the leading rusher and he's going to land on teams' radars throughout the fall and spring as a guy that could be a 2nd, 3rd round pick?
Yeah, I don't know if he'll be a 2nd round pick. I just think because of his style, he's not a fast guy. He's about, he's about 220 pounds. Probably play about 215 this year. I think that's where they want him to be at. He's got nimble feet. I'll tell you that. His feet remind me of Jerome Bettis. If anybody remember watching Jerome Bettis run that had the nimble feet. He's got very nimble feet. He's got good vision. He's got all the attributes you want in a running back as far as running the football, except one. He doesn't have the speed. He's not a blazing guy, so he's not going to go to the combine and go run a 4.3 40. That's not going to happen. He's not Will Shipley. That's what Will Shipley was, right? And so, but what he is he's a bruiser, and he can play that. He can get you those tough yards. He's a good goal line guy. He can break away for those 40, 50-yard runs, but, he's not going to break it for 60 or 70. So that's what hurts him. Also, where he's got to get better is in his pass pro. If you remember the Florida State game last year, Clemson's winning late. They're driving down the field to go up 2 scores. And Maffa totally misses the linebacker, just didn't see him, and instead of staying in and protecting his quarterback blindside, who was rolling out to his left, by the way, he looked, scanned the field, missed the linebacker, and then ran a route. And the linebacker just came right off the edge, untouched, and just, blew Cade Klubnik up. The ball pops out. The other guy picks it up and runs it for a touchdown that allows Florida State to put the game into overtime instead of Clemson winning by 2 scores. So, that was a big play in the game, obviously, and it came because, he just missed a block. And so those are things he's got to get better at. And I think the pro scouts are going to want to see more of that on film, that he's improved in those areas and limiting those kind of mistakes to where, because in NFL, it's all about that quarterback. And if you don't protect him, you're not going to last long. And so he's got to improve there.
Well, speaking of helping out the quarterback, there is no better best friend to a quarterback in some offenses than a good, reliable pass-catching tight end. And Clemson does have one, on the roster with Jake Brenningstool, who I don't even know if I personally, just from the games that I've seen of him, would classify him as much as a tight end because he plays a lot as more like a big slot. Mm-hmm. But, he had 50 receptions this past year at Clemson. 6'6", 230, just kind of has that long frame that you're kind of looking for in that kind of receiving role. So, what does he kind of bring to the table, and, what is going to be his role in the offense this year?
Yeah, he comps more as a Travis Kelce than he does a Kittle. So I think, when you look at him, you described him great. He's more of a big guy that lines outside in the slot and he can cause major mismatches. I think he had a good year last year, nearly 500 yards receiving yards, over 50 catches, I think 498 yards. I believe maybe 5 or 6 touchdowns in that. And so I think he has an opportunity to add on to that this year, especially as I mentioned earlier with the young wide receivers coming in that are going to, allow Clemson to have more weapons on the outside and have more of a vertical threat than they've had in recent years. If that holds true, then I think that's going to allow a lot of things to open up for Brenningstool. And think about maybe a few years ago, a guy by the name of Jordan Leggett that Clemson had. If you remember, he was a guy with, 60 catches, over 700 yards, 8 or 9 touchdowns. I think Brenningstool can have that type of season as long as those guys on the outside are doing their job. Now, as you mentioned, he's not going to be a blocker in the NFL. It's not his thing. It's not what he does. But you know what? In the NFL now, tight ends aren't like they used to be. It's not like the old days where you had to line up and block and then also go out and catch a pass. Now they want to put you out in the slot like Travis Kelce, and that's the norm. And so I think because of that, if he can have the year I think he has, I think he could sneak into that, maybe be a first-round prospect. I really do, because there's not many tight ends like him. He's not as good as Bowers at Georgia, who just now went in there with the Raiders. He's not as good as Bowers, but he's right behind him. He's that kind of talent to where I think a team could take a chance with them in the later round, that late first round when you get into the 20s. Maybe they'll say, you know what, this is a guy that we could use and could be a weapon for us, and they may grab him there in the first round. I could see that happen for Jake Brenningstool.
He is certainly going to be one player that we're watching throughout the fall, because again, this is expected to be a pretty good tight end class coming up here. But, going back to the defense here, and you talked a lot about, guys that are in the front seven, some guys in the secondary, but I know RJ Mickens is a guy that could have went to the 2024 draft. He decided to come back another year just because he felt as if it was best for his development. I mean, what does he bring to the table as a guy, who pretty much came out and said, like, hey, the reason I'm coming back is because I feel like we have a lot of unfinished business, and he just wants to finally get to that national championship and end up winning.
Yeah, RJ is the best pure football player, I think, on the team. Now, what I mean by that is he understands his position. He understands his teammates' positions. And so he's that quarterback in the backfield for Clemson. He really kind of took this on a year ago and really kind of, as the season went along, increased that role, and the coaches got trusted more and more of him because he very rarely gets out of position. He's a good tackler. The problem is he just doesn't have the size that you want in an NFL safety. He's not a very tall guy. He's not that 6'2", 6'3" kind of guy like a Jaron Kearse is. He's not that kind. But he's head smart. I mean, he's just his mental game is over the top, and that's what makes him attractive. I think he's a guy that could be a 5th, 6th round draft pick this coming season for a team, and will be a good. He's a guy that will stay with a team for a while. Like if he gets his opportunity and he excels, he'll be a guy that'll be back there, and he won't be a Pro Bowl player. He's not that kind of player, but he'll be a good fit for any team to where you can trust him. Things are going to get done back there with him back there, and he understands what's happening. That's the kind of player he is and what he'll bring to an NFL team. But as far as he's not going to be a top line talent. I think he can have a great year as a safety this year for Clemson. He's obviously a great college safety, but again, it's more of his size that's going to limit him when he gets to the next level. And so he's going to have to use his smarts and his instinct to probably win an NFL roster spot.
Sorry, I think Andrew
my feed went out for a little bit.
It's okay. Happens.
All right. Yep. Technology, Going back to the offensive side of the ball, you talked about how Clemson is trying to get more explosive in their wide receiver room, bringing in some true freshman talent that, can hopefully contribute this year. But in terms of guys that, that are on the roster looking to contribute, one of the guys that kind of stood out is Antonio Williams, who had a bit of a promising freshman year, but injuries kind of held him back and shortened his season last year. What can really be expected of him? And do you see him being a guy that could declare for the 2025 draft, or does he maybe need another year in college?
He's a guy that if he can have the kind of year Clemson wants him to have, he's definitely a guy that I could see go to the next level. Again, he's more of like a Amari Rogers comp, if you remember. So I think he's probably a middle round guy. Is where it's high he'll be. So that's why I think if he has a good year, he'll probably go pro, because I just don't see the benefits of him coming back for another year, because I don't know if he'll improve that stock, right? So he's a reliable catcher. A guy that would be a good 3rd round target. Good third down target for Clemson for Clemson this year, but for any NFL team as well. And I think he runs good routes. Probably could use a little bit more experience with his route trees. I think being last year he got hurt and missed several games because of a foot injury. That kind of set him back a little bit. I know he's got a chip on his shoulder this year. He thinks he's better than what most people think he is. And that's always good if you got a player with that kind of attitude coming in. So I think he can improve himself. He's probably, day 2, maybe day 3 draft pick kind of guy. Good, reliable hands, runs good routes, can improve in his route tree. He's got decent speed, not blow away speed, so he's not going to run past anybody. So his route tree's got to be exceptional, and that's why he probably needs to work on that. Can catch you probably 50, 60 balls every season, guaranteed. Get you about 600 or 700 yards and maybe 6 or 7 touchdowns. You do that, you can have a long career in the NFL. So, I think that's where he's at this year coming in, and I'll be surprised if he comes back next year for Clemson. I think he's a guy that if he has the year they think he can have, he'll be going pro next year. Another guy that he's going to be eligible to go in the draft is Troy Stellato. This is a guy who I think has the most upside of any of the Clemson returning receivers. Very good speed, got great hands, runs great routes. He's got everything you want in a receiver. The only problem is he's got the knack for getting injured. And I think he did play all 13 games last year, but he also was injured. And so though he didn't miss any games, I think the pro scouts would like to see him go through an entire season without any injuries and see if he can stay on the field and make plays, because when he does, man, his hands are unbelievable. I mean, this guy's got the best hands. I compare his hands to Hines Ward. If you remember what Hines Ward was like with the Steelers, that's what his hands are like. I don't know if he goes and gets pedicures like Hines Ward used to or whatever, but he's got great hands and he runs great routes. And he would make any NFL roster, I think, if he can show that he can stay on the field for a long period of time.
Yeah, those are some names that are certainly going to be interesting to watch, because, again, when you think of Clemson, you think of the wide receivers. Obviously, you think T. Higgins and Mike Williams, DeAndre Hopkins, Sammy Watkins. To me, that kind of standard that those guys came in and set has not necessarily been there over the last couple of years. But last one for you here relating to just the season in general. Clemson, they're playing Georgia. They've got Louisville on the schedule. What are some of the most intriguing matchups on the schedule for the Tigers going into 2024?
Yeah, it's interesting. Georgia is, without a doubt, probably the most interesting one to start off the season, because though Clemson is they're going to be the underdog in this game, and I don't think many people think they're going to win it, and understandably so. Georgia's loaded and probably going to be the preseason number 1 team in the country. But if Clemson can play with Georgia and hang with them, I don't necessarily have to beat them. I think it could say a lot about what kind of team Clemson might have going forward. So I think that game, not necessarily from a win-loss standpoint, but from how they play Georgia, will say a lot maybe about this Clemson team. And then as you go into the season, Clemson's got a big a couple weeks after the Georgia game, they got a big game against NC State in Death Valley. NC State's an up-and-coming team. A lot of people are projecting them to maybe play for the AC Championship this year. And with Dave Doran, feel like they maybe can get over the hump. They got that big game in Death Valley, I think September 28th. So that's one to circle. I think the other one to circle is the DJ Uiagalelei game, where the former Clemson quarterback in Florida State will be hosting Clemson on October 5th. A lot of people think the winner of that game will represent one of the spots in the ACC championship game. So that's going to be a big one to watch. And then you mentioned the Louisville game. Obviously, is a game because a lot of people are high on Louisville, and they think, what Coach Braum has done coming in there, got him to the championship game last year, that maybe he can get him back again this year. So I think those are probably the top ones for Clemson this season to look at. Other than that, I think the rest of the schedule is pretty winnable for Clemson. So if they can get past those games, then you're probably looking at a 11-1 Clemson team. That would definitely be in the college football playoff as the ACC champion. If they don't win the ACC, but they go 11-1 in the regular season, I think that's going to get them in the college football playoff as well. But especially, like I said, if they play Georgia tight. And if they give Georgia a tough game and then they roll through the rest of their schedule, then I think Clemson, regardless of what happens, that AC championship game would be in the college football playoff. I would say Clemson's one of the favorites to win the conference. I wouldn't say they're a solid lockdown like you were a few years ago, because I think, as you mentioned, I think Virginia Tech is another team. I forgot to mention that game. That's a big one there in November, early November in Blacksburg. That's going to say a lot about who plays in the ACC championship game. So, you got Virginia Tech, SMU, I think is a dark horse. People better pay attention to SMU. I would not be surprised to see them in Charlotte to play for that championship. They got a very favorable schedule, and they bring back a little talent from a team that went 11-3 last year. So people are kind of sleeping on SMU, and I don't know why, because their schedule is pretty darn manageable. And then, Florida State, of course, NC State, and Virginia Tech, and Clemson. Miami as well. I would say, I'm done picking Miami, though, because they've just burned me so often. I mean, I picked them last year to be in the ACC championship game, and I got burned. I picked them a few years ago, and I got burned. And I'm just like, you know what? Until Miami actually shows me they can win big games and play at the level consistently that Clemson and Florida State play at, I'm not picking them until then. So Miami is a team I think can maybe sneak in there, but until they show it to me, I'm not putting them in that group. But those are about the 5 or 6 teams I would say can challenge Clemson. And to me, it's a wide open ACC this year. I think any one of those 6 teams can win the conference. I wouldn't be surprised by any of them.
Yeah, I mean, it is going to be fun to go ahead and watch. Before we get you out of here, where can people kind of follow you in the world of social media and, keep up with your work as the college football season gets closer and closer?
Yeah, so you can follow me at Steeler Will, Steelers, at Steeler Will on Twitter, or X, excuse me. That's where you can follow my work. Even though I'm a Steelers guy, it's my handle Steeler Will. I cover Clemson. Anybody that follows me knows it's mostly Clemson stuff I do. And then, of course, you can follow our website at The Clemson Insider, also on X. Also, you can follow us on Facebook there. You can follow me on Instagram at Steeler Will as well. We're pretty much all over Facebook, Instagram, and all that with the Clemson Insider. So you can follow us at any of those platforms. So there's tons of places to do it. Also, you can watch my podcast. I should promote that. I'll be starting that back up. I'll have a new guest host. I can't say who that is just yet. So I'll have a new guest host this year with the Believe in Clemson podcast. Levon Kirkland now works for Clemson, so he's no longer able to work with me anymore on my podcast. So I hate that, because he's a good friend, and I'm going to miss him on my podcast. But we'll be doing that starting back up here in a few weeks, and we'll be all the way through football season like we do all the way through. So they can, again, those are different ways they can find me at the Clemson Insider, and then at Believe in Clemson Football.
Absolutely. Well, this has been phenomenal. We'll definitely have to have you on at some point during the season to get an update on all things Clemson. Thanks again.
All right, guys. Thanks for having me.